Okay, thank you. Okay, so I'm sure everybody in the room can hear me because this mic's pretty loud. How about the folks online?
Sounds good.
Okay. So let's get started. Thanks everyone for attending this session where we are discussing the topic of opening doors to science, to open science through continuous assessment and address of user needs. Give me just a second here. They're not, the slides aren't advancing. Okay, now
Okay.
you have to just use the buttons and nothing else. Okay. So quickly, I'm not going to spend a lot of time here. I just wanted to give you an idea about what we're going to cover. We have three major topics here: novel methods, tools and technologies, opportunities and challenges, where what we aim to do is from each of those sessions, capture our key takeaways and brainstorm about how we can address the session goals, which you're about to see on the next slide. So we want this session to be really informal. It's a conversation, and just going to give you a little bit of background. Frank and I are going to walk through the introductory slides, and I have a slide introducing folks and those kinds of things, but I'm pretty informal. I'm a talker, and as I go through my slides, I tend to talk faster than I advance the slides, so just bear with me. So just to kind of set the scopes, ESDIS and the DACs have a user needs working group. It's a cross EOSDIS activity, and it centers on leveraging existing information and technology resources to improve the overall user experiences for earth science users. So the true mission is to identify high impact user needs that can resolve existing issues for multiple earth science resources. Traditionally, we have gathered user needs from lots of different areas. Frank, did you want to talk a little bit to this slide? Or
Actually, this is one we put together years ago, and just for some context about user needs, this group, I think many people in the room remember the user services a long time ago, which was very successful in its time. Again, it's trying to reflect on how the DACs could do better in serving the users, et cetera. And that went on for years very successfully. But as time went on, kind of the technology development necessary within ESDIS sort of diverged from what the users, the user services folks were actually doing. So we recalibrated about 6 years ago, something like that. So that group was somewhat disbanded. Then we have a new group coming in from the DACs to focus on user needs. And as Tammy said with this slide, what we're trying to articulate here is how we gather that. Because there was some criticism early on about the throwing it over the transom that, oh, we're off developing this, but that's not really what the users want. So we're trying to actually engage the users to get that information. And that's what these meetings are all about. That's why Tammy was saying it's much more of a conversation. So we're not going to kill you with slides, but we really, really do encourage for people to tell us what you think about these topics. And there's some critical ones we're going to talk about. But this is the many sources we gather it from. And what we're trying to show is we have some large sources of information, user need information, like the ACSI survey. So we have large sampling of people, but the information that we get from that is fairly shallow, because the ACSI is really to develop a score, which is useful, and we give that to headquarters for the last 20 years. And we also gain some information on that. So a big pool, but not a lot of information. But we use other means by which to dive into that. Some of those are the applications workshops that some of you may have attended. Those are really good information exchanges for upcoming missions and what applications could be tied to those. The webinar feedback, Jennifer's here from our communications team, and she's the one that does all of the webinars, and we have a bevy of information that comes back from those talks. But again, it's not as large, maybe a few hundred people. And then we're kind of going down to conference encounters like the ESIP, advisory groups like our UWGs. Those are users, and those are people that also represent users. And those are very informative. And as you can see, as we go to the right, we're getting more and more deep into detail, and all the way ultimately to things like help tickets to like, this does not work. I mean, that's about as user need as you can actually get. So it's this whole bevy of information that we actually use to do it. But I just wanted to put you in context with this, because this is one of our main sources of getting that in-depth information. So please feel free to, as Tammy has prompted, to speak up. So Tammy, go ahead. I think that's
So one of the things we're trying this year is this session. And I'll put a little plug in. We're also planning a session at AGU where we talk with the broader community. Okay, so our goals for today are, we're hoping to develop strategies for transitioning user needs identification and address to a more continuous model that supports open science. We want to discuss opportunities for identifying, targeting, and supporting underrepresented communities. And we want to identify methods for ensuring that individual as well as community user support continues to persist through a collective web presence. Okay, so I promise I'm going to stop talking in just a second, but this slide tells you about your session facilitators. Some of them are in the room, like Frank and Sarah and myself, and Patrick is here. We have a group of speakers here. We have in the room, we have Patrick Quinn. Online, we have Ashish. We have Aaron Fries from the LPDAC, Nate James, Brandon Bottomley from ASF User Services, and the rest of the crew that you saw on the other slide. So we're pretty informal here, but the most important participant that we have in today's session is each of you. Okay, so here's what we want to try to do. This is a discussion. In the slides, you'll see some examples and some talking points, but it is not death by PowerPoint. Okay, so we have a notes document, the links here. Feel welcome to write notes in there. So throughout the session, there are going to be a number of questions, and you're welcome to share your thoughts on those questions, but you're also welcome to ask questions that we haven't considered that aren't on the slides. And during the wrap up at the end, then we're going to capture those highlights. So this slide deck that was uploaded has some placeholder slides where for each of the topics that we're going to talk about, we capture the key takeaways. And so in that Google Doc version, we are going to capture those and review those at the end.
Yeah. Somewhere we could post that. I mean, there's no way to take them.
Yeah. Okay, so if you go into the ESIP agenda, I think you should be able to click down into it from there.
Yeah, if you go to Sketch, or go to just the ESIP July meeting page and then click on the session itself in Sketch, there'll be video stream, but that will also take you to the Kiko chat, which will have the Google Doc in
it, and they can just click on
and you can just click and work through it in there.
The word.
So you'll see video.
There we go. Thank you for beta testing.
Okay, so if anyone needs any help accessing the Google Doc, you need to see, and I can't believe I can't see your badge. Mark is going to help. And isn't it great that the badges are so big for us older blind people to see? Okay, so let's get started.
Oh, I got it. What am I talking about?
You're just talking about the
that's kind of-
context a little bit that you've
Yeah,
already covered.
We've kind of covered that because I want to get to
But you
the
wanna make-
speakers as well. Yeah. Yeah, we had that. So I think I basically kind of already said all that, didn't I? So unless there's anything like it. So, and the metrics, of course, we collect. I've already said it again. We have multiple tools by which that we're gathering this information. The one thing that I did want to add on to what Tammy said, and the reason why she's like beating the drum for like, you know, thanks, Mark, go to this doc, you know, put this stuff in, because unlike some places you may go where they're asking you your opinion and it sort of falls into a black hole, this is exactly the opposite of that, because we actually roll up what people's requests, you know, what they feel is a challenge, what we need to move to, and we hold on to all of these things when we're coming up with our, in essence, work plan for what the user needs people will be doing as well. So that's really why Tammy is emphasizing why we collect all of this information. That is the lifeblood by which user needs work gets done, because we're not making it up. We're really drawing it from users. And that's really all I wanted to say with all of that. So what, and Tammy and I talked about this one. I don't know if it made as much sense on some of the other slides, but this unified web presence, which you're probably going to hear about before, is kind of a big deal, because there's web unification that's going on with the idea that we're going to have, you know, one website that's going to bring together basically all of the DACs in that diversity. And what we'd like to kind of push back on you is how this is going to happen. So it's inevitable. It's not that we're going to stop the process, but some challenges within that are, how can we maintain that really unique connection with these very disparate user groups, which the DACs have been consummate at, you know, going all the way back to the beginning. No one at NASA wants to lose that. So we're reaching, that's the kind of a challenge we'd like to throw out. How can we keep that diversity in this unified presence as well? So think about that as you hear some of the tools and some of the activities that we have going on as well. And Tammy, you want to see this one?
I'm going to grab your microphone to remind me. Just turn. Okay.
All right. Go ahead, Tammy. I'll let you
Yes.
take out.
So here are some examples on this slide, just to get you thinking about what we're about to talk about. As we move into more disciplinary science rather than diverse discipline-oriented DACs, we want to make sure that we need cross-training. We're working on a more robust ticketing system in EOSDIS. We think it'd be important for open science to engage and encourage users to use Earth Data Forum, because that's a public venue to talk about various different topics. We think maybe multiple disciplinary science topic webinars might be helpful. Cloud tutorials, maybe there's some new ideas like podcasts. And so we're going to dive into the what else. And so to get started, what we're going to do is we're going to run the mic if you've got something to say during the feedback sessions, so that the folks online can hear you. And we're going to start out talking about novel methods and hear from Sarah Lubkin of ESDIS and Aaron Freeze from the LP DAC.
There we go.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Cool. So we have a lot of changes that are coming to ESDIS and the DACs. Frank mentioned web unification, our unified web presence. Also, I am sure everybody's heard we're moving data to the cloud, and hopefully our users as well. Also, with NASA's focus on open science, we're looking at working with new communities that we haven't worked with before, and also focusing on applications. This applied science at NASA means using data for decision-making for things like managing parks or, looking at where trees should be planted to avoid heat islands in cities. And then also, this means transitioning the DACs to becoming science enabling centers rather than just more helping people use our data for science. So as we change and grow, how do we respond? How do we measure and then respond to our user needs? So that's a question. Right now, we have a few things that we are doing to work to figure out what our user needs are and work with our users. First of all is our user needs group, which Frank and Tammy run with representatives from the DACs. And we meet periodically to discuss what our user needs are. We have an annual meeting where the user needs representatives and also some of the DAC managers come and meet with us, and we talk about what the priorities will be for the next year and then work on them. We also have an open science point of contact group, which also includes representatives from the DACs. And the purpose of that group is to first get the DACs trained in the TOPS open science curriculum. And then figure out what do NASA's new open science requirements mean for us and our users, and how can we facilitate open science as DACs. So we have these two groups, and this year we're going to get these groups together to talk about how they can collaborate to really meet user needs around open science. We also have an airborne field data working group. Airborne field data is very different from satellite data, and the users of that data, as well as the data producers, have unique needs. So about a year ago, we did a workshop and invited airborne and field data users and producers, got a lot of feedback from them, wrote a white paper, and came up with a list of recommendations. And one of those, which actually took care of many of those recommendations, was to create an airborne field data resource center on Earth data that where people can find more information about working with airborne data and the many ways that airborne data is unique. And there will actually be a session on that on Thursday, if anyone's interested in learning more. Unbound is a headquarters initiative to work with communities that are not familiar with NASA data, but could use NASA data. And we've been looking at some of the feedback from those workshops and figuring out what can we do to better enable science for those communities. And then Erin's going to talk about OpenScapes in a minute. We also have DACs collaborating around new missions. Many of our new missions coming up are multidisciplinary. In this slide, you can see all the ESO missions, and many of these touch on many areas of Earth science. Our DACs are right now very discipline specific. They are very good at serving their user communities, but to really serve multidiscipline missions, we need these our DACs to come together and work together around these missions. And then the last thing I have on my list is improving connections with applied science. Our DACs traditionally have worked with scientists, and we're very good at that. And now we're looking at applications and how can we work better to help applied science. So I'm going to invite Erin up here to talk about some of the work that LP DAC is doing along these lines.
All right, so I don't know if I'd classify what we do as novel methods. It's really just kind of doing the groundwork to take in user needs. I mean, I'll get into these three aspects, but I mean, we often reach out to our community through all the avenues that we can, whether it's workshops or or meetings and whatnot to gather kind of where we're falling short on certain things, or identifying what's kind of available, but it's not really known to our user communities. And so we do that groundwork, and it's not just the LP. I know that other DACs do this as well, where we gather those kind of stories from our user communities and try to bring them back to integrate into services or utilities that DACs build themselves, or into the greater kind of ecosystem of this services. A couple groups that we do or have had relationships with, at least from a NASA standpoint, we've had a relationship with NASA Develop for a number of years now, where we coordinate with their coordinators and identify groups, or at least the nodes that in our specific case use our data, use our services. We tag up with the kind of node leads as well, so that up front, in front of maybe one of the sessions, that they are aware that we're listening, we're available to provide any kind of support, whether it's just identification of data or services that may be available. And then when we do identify maybe nodes that are very specific, at least using maybe Earth data or land data that the LP supports, we could do a workshop. We have done workshops in the past with them, with very specific kind of use cases in mind that are kind of framed around what that node is doing, really kind of demonstrating the data that's available, as well as the services that they could potentially use. And this, I think, has been very successful as far as making those participants aware of what's available. But also giving feedback to us about, oh, we didn't know that was existed. Also, I mean, there's opportunity to say with those groups, well, that's maybe a spatial resolution that's too coarse for our needs. Oftentimes, we may have insights into alternative data products that may not be NASA, and be able to point them in those directions. So we're not just a resource just for LPDAC data, LPDAC services. We do have a greater experience with other remote sensing products that we could probably pass along to participants there. Severe is another area that we maybe not historically have been involved, but more recently have been trying to insert ourselves, not poorly, but trying to see where we can assist those groups. This is an applied group. They are also, along with the other groups, navigating the transition to the cloud with us. And so what's that look like for them? How does that affect their already operational workflows? And so we have at times had interviews with them just to identify maybe what things are breaking, maybe better ways of doing workflows. And so we were actively engaging where we can with those groups to see where we can assist and make things easier, I guess, for those groups. OpenScapes has been one of the bigger initiatives that I've been involved in for over the last couple of years. And OpenScapes, if you are not aware, is a group that is focused on kind of advocating for open, friendlier science, bringing people into the community and creating a space that is welcoming and helps advance science as a community. NASA and OpenScapes has this partnership where not only are we kind of advocating for that open science part, but we're also addressing the cloud part. So we have tried to create a space, create resources that is a space for open collaborative work, while also showing users how to migrate their workflows, their kind of mindset to cloud. And I think we've created a number of resources that are very useful, at least as a starting point. We're kind of growing those and evolving those so that they have the maximum impact that they possibly can. So I think I'll probably stop there. Like I said, it's not really novel. It's just really kind of doing the groundwork and getting the stories, getting the issues, being active listeners with those groups, and really kind of taking that to make a better kind of environment for them to work in.
Tammy, how much time do we have?
Oh, we're doing great.
Okay.
So, Sarah, did you want to kick that discussion off here?
Yeah, so
So we're gonna run my.
Yep.
Right.
I think we have these questions. These are what we came up with as prompts, but we are completely happy to let this discussion go in another direction if necessary. But I think maybe we'll start with, how can we help our existing users transition data in the cloud? What can we do that we're not doing, I guess, is one thing there. Anybody?
That's your cue. Any thoughts? Thanks, Mark.
There,
Pat.
Patrick, yeah. Patrick can talk
Um,
about some of the things we're doing.
No, I'm actually going to refuse to answer this question. So I wanted to point out maybe a question that we should answer for the group first that's coming from online, which is, who are your users, and is it mostly scientist users?
Yeah. Let's go.
Yes, so I think it is primarily science users, whether it's from government or academia. I think if you look at, so we have this thing called Earth Data Login that everybody loves. And there's kind of, when you set that up, there's a space where you identify your organization. And this is probably not the best source of information, but using that as information, government and academia do make up the bulk majority of anybody downloading data from USGS. I think it's across the USGS, but definitely from LP.
Yeah. Now I wonder if Bob's users are different.
Well, I've been, oh, sorry, Bob Chen. I'm currently manager of the NASA Socioeconomic Data and Application Center for another 2 weeks. Well, you know, our users are so diverse, there's no one single way to characterize them. I guess, you know, what I'm thinking about this is, because you specifically use the word existing users, is, you know, users don't like change generally. And they'll change if there's incentive. And if all the other problems that they're worried about, like how do I get my own data up into the cloud if I have to use it there, we have to make that as easy as possible. You know, we have to give them incentive like free computing or all the other advantages. Because they'd rather just do it this way they've done it all, you know, all along, and the way their grad students and stuff have done it. So I kind of think we have to think about those transitions. And for us, since a lot of our GIS users, you know, are sort of in this hybrid cloud environment where they have both desktop and now they have cloud resources, you know, we have to do what we've been working on, which is how to integrate GIS kinds of functions to make it seamless between the two environments.
Yeah, I think it really hit me in the session earlier today. The one that got the most votes, I think, is really the biggest challenge to the whole cloud thing. And the whole open science thing actually is incentives. And it's kind of the same things Bob's saying. A lot of work for a little return. And I think you know, for the greater good doesn't put food on your table. And you know, the way research community is measured right now is not in line, I think, with the open science thing. So I think the opportunities are, how do you change that incentive structure to get there? I don't have the answer, but I think that's the biggest mountain to climb.
We had an online question. Did you want to have a lead? Oh, can you? Thanks, Aaron.
Okay, so Rebecca has asked, what cost comparison has been done between hosting a computing cluster available to the public for analysis next to data, in parentheses, computation costs limited without an account, versus the current cloud pursuit? I am cautious of the push to the cloud because it means our science is tied to a company's success and persistence.
Want to grab it?
Anyone want to? That's a bit over my head.
Yeah, Patrick, did you have it? Fight to that one.
I was trying to pull up the question.
Oh, okay. Well, take a look at that. And yeah, if you want to go ahead.
I don't know, you were talking about anyone jumping in with answers. I think one of the things in our context for deciding between on-prem resources and cloud resources is scale, scope, and timeline. If it's something that is only can happen once and is relatively out of scale for us to set up a new computing cluster, we're often encouraging users to either use cloud resources or available computing resources like Exceed or Access or whatever it's called now, rather than setting up or putting investment into on-prem resources. But I know that that's very discipline specific and project specific. And, you know, one of the questions I see in the chat here that I think has a lot of end users concerned is who's footing the bill for the long-term maintenance and sustainability of cloud infrastructure for their own work and their own data. Because, you know, it's easy to put your data up there. Sometimes it's more challenging to figure out who's paying for it next year or 10 years down the line. Sure. I'm Alexis Gerritsen. I'm the incoming data stewardship committee chair for ESIP.
Patrick, did you have any response to the online question, or well, you could table it until you have the expertise?
I have one.
I don't have much for the end user perspective, but at least from the putting all our eggs into one commercial basket perspective, I would say that we are also conscious of that risk. And we try to make sure that we're mitigating it through having different avenues if we needed to restore the data from elsewhere, to make sure that multiple copies exist in multiple places so that we're not fully beholden to, you know, a single commercial entity or anything along those lines.
I saw Julius, right?
Hi, this is Benita. I'm from Justice. For the past year, we have been working a lot with OpenScapes, and we have developed our own resources to help users to transition to the cloud. We have put out these resources out there, but where we're struggling right now is to convey the message to them, like why is it important for them to transition to the cloud? Is it the performance, or is it the cost saving, or what is it in them for the user? So I think that's where we're struggling right now, that we're not able to say that, you know, it will increase the performance, or it will minimize the cost. So if we can say that aloud to the users, then I think they will be, it will be easier for them to transition to the cloud. Thank you.
I think we don't want to get bogged down on clouds, so
Well,
yeah, which is important, but.
Hi, I'm Julie Lyons. I lead OpenScapes and co-lead NASA OpenScapes with Aaron Robinson, and work with Aaron and Benita and many of the decks. And I was just thinking about, in our experience working really closely with researchers, not all of them are resistant to change. They are actually feeling stuck in their current workflows and like know that there's faster, better ways, whether that's Google Docs rather than Word docs, whether that's cloud versus local, whether that's GitHub versus email. And so I just wanted to put that out there, to like, people are interested in change and they're trying to figure out how and need help with the learning. And that's where carpentries and what Carrie was talking about this morning is so critical. So I just wanted to say that. Thanks.
So there's really no direct answer to that question. We're trying to answer that question through this session and bridging the gap as we transition to cloud. So, thanks everybody for the input on that topic.
Yeah, I think maybe we'll go down to so in the past, our DACs really focused on discipline and community. We have like the physical oceanography DAC, we have the snow and ice stack. But our future focus is also on multidisciplinary users and application users. So one question is, how do we identify what these communities are in their needs? Anyone want to comment on that?
We got it myself. We have song.
Hi, I'm Steve from USGS. I'm curious if you all track citations of your data or make it easy for people to cite your data. I work with a international biodiversity aggregator called GBIF, and they do a really good job of that. They actually employ somebody to engage with people who have cited their data so that they can learn more about how and why it was used. Do y'all do anything like that?
We do a lot with that. One of the best examples is LP DAC actually does user interest stories based on the citation metrics that they found. We've done that some at Oak Ridge DAC, and each of the DACs maintain citation metrics, collect those continuously, and try to learn what we can from what we're seeing as the research output. But that is a very good point that we hadn't talked about. Some of the DACs are actually automating citation metrics collection too, and we think that that's a really good avenue to continue to pursue.
Yeah, I was going to say our process is very manual right now, but we try to make it where we provide citations for data for services as simply as we can, whether it's from the product page or from a output or accompanying output file. Strongly encourage people to cite the data, cite the services. That doesn't always happen. And then, yeah, it would be nice if we had a more automated way that we could apply across all DACs rather than having kind of everybody doing their own thing. But yeah.
Deborah might actually be saying the same thing I'm about to say, but as far as, and I'm Stephanie Wingo with the Airborne Data Management Group and NASA Impact. And, in regards to the multidisciplinary users, that's for airborne and field data. We have a whole host of multidisciplinary users. And, I guess this kind of feeds into input from the workshop that Sarah mentioned about a year ago. There's a lot of that challenge with multiple DACs trying to address, whatever their current science problem is. And so the need for consistency and, being able to come to one DAC versus another and trying to have a similar experience from the user's perspective to make it more efficient for them to then get to those multidisciplinary data sets that, maybe if you've worked in the same domain for a long time, it's very simple, but when you're starting to cross domains, you're having to kind of relearn how to do that. And that can be a bit of overhead that, maybe we can make that better so that the scientists can do their science.
I have just a quick comment. Anytime you meet an interdisciplinary scientist, ask questions and listen. They have a lot to say, a lot of frustrations to share.
Sandra. And then we'll get you, Bob.
Hi, I don't want to derail this good conversation. If there are any other follow-up comments or questions that are related to this, because I don't want to.
Oh, we'll maybe look at.
Yeah.
Behind you real quick.
Okay.
Then Sandra, you can.
Thanks. Yeah, I'll be very brief. I'm Bob Downs, also from CDAC. We had done a little pilot study looking at recent data users, that is citations of data during 2020 and 2021. And what we found is in those articles, a lot of different tools are being used. Some of the traditional ones, MATLAB, Gephi, Excel even, Google Sheets. But also a lot are now using R and Python. And some of the other traditional tools being used are like SPSS and Stata even. So I think that what that tells us is that we need to provide a variety of different ways in which the users can either access the data to use their own tools or to use some of the tools that we provide for them so that they can do some of the things that they want to do. So I guess for diverse audiences, we should have diverse tools. Thanks.
If you don't mind, I'm gonna go really quick because that was a good, yes. Sorry, okay, yeah, okay, I'll be quick. So I'm Sandra Blevins. I work with ESDIS at NASA Goddard and the Commercial Small Satellite Data Acquisition Team program. Anyway, so I keep thinking about ever since the plenary this morning. It also goes into the third question here. What can we do more with underrepresented communities? I keep thinking about things like their network access, right? Their internet. People who live places who don't have access to the internet or do not have access to machines or equipment like the way we do. And that's even in our own country, right? That's national too. There are areas where, you know, folks are lacking these sorts of items. And so, you know, when we talk about diversifying our tools and services due to these needs, I think a lot about what about, you know, folks depending on their mobile device rather than their machine, you know, accessing the way they're looking and viewing. Anyway, so I'm getting a little bit sidetrack, but I hope that's a thing because I'm not offering like a solution, but I mean, it's just like yet another one of these questions of like, what can we do to help more in that area? Because that's like a huge concern and it's fundamental, right? Like we can't, I mean, we can talk forever about how to make the data more accessible and stuff, but if they can't even access the internet.
Yeah. I'll leave it at that. One more question and then we'll move to the next section.
I believe this is a clarification from an earlier point, but Catherine asked, does data citation mean a DOI or something else?
It means a DOI.
All right, good. Get that mic on.
It's okay. You can talk as long as you want to.
Very quickly, I wanted to speak to the point about working with communities with lack of internet access and something that we've seen successful at the Carpentries. We have a subgroup of our community called Carpentries Offline, and they use Raspberry Pis. And so they load all of the lessons and the data and everything onto the Raspberry Pi, and then they go to, you know, we've run workshops in Africa and like you said, other areas across the US, especially at tribal colleges. And but again, they have to have a computer, which is another problem, but you know, at least without having the internet access, everything is loaded onto the Raspberry Pi and then they can teach the workshop. So there are some solutions out there.
Okay.
Yeah.
So we're going to move on to the next section, tools and technologies, but that doesn't mean this discussion has to stop. We have our online document, so please raise questions, put comments there. We would love to hear your feedback. And I'm going to hand this over to Nate James and Patrick Quinn from ESDIS, and then Ashish from NASA Impact is online.
Good afternoon. All right, Nate James here. I'm going to talk about the Earth Data Forum, which is a tool that we have that's preparing us for change. So want to start with just defining what it is. The Earth Data Forum is an online moderated platform where the user communities that are serviced by the 12 DACs, discipline-oriented Earth Science Data Archives, where those user communities are, they engage with each other and they engage with the subject matter experts in their discipline. So the forum is a unique platform for that type of engagement, and it has a lot of potential. The forum is operated out of the Langley DAC, ASDC. It's moderated and administered by really representatives from all the DACs. So we work together as a team to move it forward and to operate it. And it's been quite successful. So we want to hear from you all how we can make it more successful. Specifically, how can the Earth Data Forum be used to facilitate open science? So this past month, give you some statistics. This past month, over 4,000 active users have come through the forum. The forum spans 11 earth science disciplines. And I'm gonna list those out because it's important to see the potential here. These are folks that are representing these disciplines: atmosphere, cryosphere, human dimensions, land, ocean, star radiance, SAR measurements, geodesy studies, hydrology, biogeochemical dynamics, terrestrial ecology. We have folks who are representing this cross spectrum, and they're engaging each other and their subject matter experts. We need to be able to take advantage of that. So, more stats. We've had 14,000, we've collected up to this point, 14,000 posts that are searchable from the activity since the forum has begun. 3,800 questions that have come from those who participated. It's important that we track and keep those, because now they become a valuable resource to what we can do with that in the future to attracting more. So questions are posed from that. Given that valuable resource, 4,000 active users this past month, how can we get those users to engage each other across the disciplines? They're right there, but what are some creative things we can do to get them to engage each other across these disciplines? How can we expand that user base even more than maybe the way that they're actively engaging right now, which maybe just be within their discipline? There must be ways to do that. We want to hear that from you. What are the ways that the forum can actually facilitate open science across those disciplines? I think some creative mechanisms or creative ideas come out of just having the users themselves give them the vision of multidisciplinary research and stir up some activity to get the discussion going amongst themselves, as well as with the subject matter experts about what's possible. When we look at the 14,000 posts and questions, let me go ahead to the next. Here's some of the questions I'm stepping through. When we look at these questions, we have about 150 categories of questions in posts. And what we do is we set up announcements that alert the users. Hey, there's something of interest to you. You've tagged your post to say, I like these types of questions, make these my favorite. And if anything comes across that has a tag with my favorite tag on it, I want to know about it. So those are called announcements and those are called tags, and they're very popular. How can we use that tagging mechanism and the favorites that people have already identified to uniquely create some opportunities for expansion in other ways that they can create those connections. To spice things up, some have suggested that we post conversation starters around those hot topics in earth science and just see what happens. and see what the community that's already to have a connection, how might they respond to some of these conversation starters? Do you think that would work? What could some of those topics be for conversation starters? And maybe have a webinar on how the forum could be used to facilitate open science. Once we are convinced that it actually can, how can we put that in a webinar format so it stimulates ideas of what's possible to support open science in that way? Hey, we have a cadre of subject matter experts in each of these disciplines that are actively volunteering, and they're waiting as these questions come, and the subject matter experts have listed themselves to say, hey, when these tags appear and are flagged, I get a note that says, hey, this is your area. Can you respond to these questions? Having that cadre and pool of subject matter experts there, is there a way that we can utilize utilize those subject matter experts and increase our user base or increase the diversity of our user base? There's something about having that pool available and accessible in that way. So these are some ideas that we're trying to put out, and we'd like to hear from you with answers or some suggestions or ideas along these lines for the next 10 minutes or so. So any ideas, any thoughts? Yes, we've got 2 questions, 2 hands, 3.
Oh, wait, I'm just gonna start. And just to remind people, if we run out of time, please put it online. So it just, but please go ahead.
Let's start off. Okay. Hi, everyone. My name is Alyssa. I work on the operations team for search and discovery for this contract. And I work a lot with Kayako. So a lot of user requests come to me and I see the different problems and different cases that users go through on a daily. And I think one feature that could be really helpful is a related to your comment or related to your topic, just kind of feature. So you see, you posted this question, and then this one over here is very related to what you posted. However, maybe it's a little bit different. And I know you mentioned trying to connect and bridge the gap between different disciplines. So I feel like that's a really good way to get the commonality, but still get diversity of conversation and to get diversity of thought. And then I think another thing you asked was how we can spark more conversation. And I think maybe posting like how-to articles or try this with the data. This is what you can do. And as people try those methods, they're going to run into problems and they're going to have different ways of doing it. And then from there can be comments or different types of questions people can post in accordance to the article or maybe the tutorial video that you might create.
That's cool. Right. Thank you, Alyssa.
Okay, so there's 14,000 posts or questions and 100 or so groups of these things. And maybe some of this is already implemented and I'm just not fully aware. But is there any ways and how, and I don't have answers, but could we leverage something like, these NLP technologies and like conversational AI for making it more efficient to go through those hundreds of groups of kinds of questions so that someone maybe who's new, it doesn't feel like, oh my gosh, there's 100, there's 14. I mean, I can't read all of that. I know. So to sort of lower that barrier to come in and feel like I can actually get started here, that, to feel like I can come into this place and I can grasp what's going on and get an answer to my question. I think that will also, that can address some of that entry, to reach additional groups that may feel prohibitive of, this, I can't understand how this is too much for me to read in one time. So maybe there's ways we can leverage those technologies to help facilitate that.
That's good. They've done a great job of having like an open, just put your question in there and it helps you just, it narrows down your scope right away, or to step through topics that are categorized a certain way so you can see where your question fits in a substructure, which shows them, we have a lot of topics, but it fits in this area and you can search that way. But a smarter search mechanism definitely would be desirable. So thank you.
Hi, Mark Parsons with the NASA Chief Science Data Office. both of those ideas are great ideas. I was going to suggest similar ones, but I guess before we go too far into this, I want to get a better understanding of the 4,000 users and how they're interacting. So do you have a sense, are these scientists, senior scientists, junior scientists, the general public, school kids? And are they interacting with each other, or are they just posting a question and getting a NASA response? Is it really a community, or is it just sort of a way to communicate with the DACs?
Right. I think right now it's a way to communicate with the DACs, but we definitely want to build a community out of them. And that's what we want to get ideas. How do you
Right.
get them to
So right now it's
build
kind
a
of
community?
So right now it's kind of one way.
Yes, it is kind of one way.
Right. So in that case, then I think the idea of provocative conversation starters is really good. And investing those SMEs, subject matter experts, in like being provocative with those questions and keeping the conversation going.
That's great. Thanks, Mark.
Okay, I work with you all and I'm even talking next, but I'm taking that hat off for a second and putting on my snarky internet user hat. I don't want to use your forums. So, and what I mean by that is, I'm a person out there with a question. I'm going to use Google, right? Or I guess people use Bing or something. And, I'm going to ask my question there, and hopefully the forum shows up as an authoritative first answer that already exists for my question, which would be great. So I think there's maybe a piece of this that's just making sure that this search engine optimization or whatnot is actually directing people to the right answers. But I think there's a second piece of this too, is that I probably already have a community. And, I'm thinking of things that exist out there. So there's like GIS.Stack Exchange or whatnot, where people, ask questions and answer questions. And it's not quite exactly our domain, but it's very similar. And it's popular and probably more popular than this. And so I think we should also be asking the question of how do we, instead of trying to bring a community to us, how do we tie into a community that already exists out there? And has already figured out really good ways to incentivize people to answer each other's questions and upvote and this, that, and the other thing.
So interforum connections.
So I wanted to mention, so your lovely idea and your lovely idea and your lovely ideas, and Patrick's lovely ideas, they're all being implemented right now. So I'm onboarding my team. So we're new to the Earth Data Forum, and I am like working every month with the developers who build all these new features, and they're already working on a sorting mechanism that if you wanted to just read about all things whatever GIS or whatever, just make up whatever, it returns the service. So any forum posts consolidated to exactly what you want to see. And the most important, I think, feature would be a direct communication from the external user to that NASA scientist would be the incentive for me as a snarky, internet person being I really need to know this answer, but I can Google around, but I'm not going to get a NASA scientist to answer me. But with the forum, you can have a private conversation. And so that is not something that's easily implemented. They're working on figuring out the best way to do that, because currently it's only people within the forum, moderator to moderator private messaging, but that is something that Kayako has that Earth Data Forum does not, that we really need that functionality available. So I'm hopeful that, and that would be much more engaging for the user community. I hope that helps a little bit.
Thank you, Sandra.
We want to do the online question.
Yes.
Yeah, we're there.
We're coming back there.
So I think there's a fairly simple one. First, are subject matter experts compensated? Okay. Okay.
They work through the DACs with the DACs. So
So yeah, the DAC the DAC representatives, that's just part of their job. The community itself is compensated by sharing and the joy of that.
So. Tammy, how much time do you got?
Well, we need to have one more question.
One more and then we're gonna go.
Yeah, I will say though, to stack onto that, most of the responses, at least from the LP, come from an LP representative who was maybe involved in the onboarding of that data or is involved with that project in some way. So it's very rare that you get a direct contact or a subject matter expert that is from the JEDI mission answering your question online right now. Unless it's an extremely in the details question, that's about the only time.
Last one, and then we're gonna move on, right?
All right, Nick Lyon, LTR Network Office. I think one thing that would help me as potentially a new user to the Earth Data Forum is this is an alphabet soup that is unnavigable to me. I would have to like the DAC search filter, which DAC is the first time I've heard that word out loud instead of reading it, is all just random at capital letters. So I like to know which DAC contains the information that I need. I would need to Google a new Google tab for every DAC to figure out like, oh, I want land processing or something. So I think even if there was just a tab that said glossary of terms or like a little pop-up or something, for me as a new user would totally help me navigate the platform.
That's great. Thank you, Nick.
We can take criticism real well. You keep doing it.
So there are several other questions in the audience. Please be sure to put your question to us afterwards or get it captured online so we can respond back to you. So we're sorry we couldn't get to everyone that had questions, but thank you for engaging us. This is great.
Struck a nerve, Nate.
Yes. I think we'll come up and pick on his section.
Hi, I'm Patrick Quinn. I'm the ESDIS architect, kind of resident computer nerd that probably talks too much. So I have a couple things here, new initiatives that we're doing, but I kind of wanted to broaden them just a little bit. So I'll talk about the initiative itself, and then I wanted to open it up to more, like, how do we really solve this problem type things. So the first is we've been talking a lot recently about a cloud playground, or it might be called a cloud hub or something like that. But taking a lot of the resources that we currently have invested in, like Jupyter notebooks, building out tutorials and things like that, and more formalizing that and opening it up more broadly to provide an environment where people can kind of dabble and try their workflow in a cloud environment as seamlessly and easily as possible. So if you all, have worked with the cloud, if you're going to sign up for your own cloud account in order to test out your workflow in AWS, it can be extremely daunting, especially if you're not super cloud savvy. And it also most likely involves entering your credit card somewhere. And all of these places are places where we can just lose people that haven't even figured out if this is right for them. And so what we want to do is to try to make it so that you go pretty much from what data that you found or that looks like it might be interesting to you, or that even that you want, and get straight into testing out some things against the data environment. So whether that be a notebook or a set of tutorials or things like that you can follow along and build out something to say, okay, this is working for me or this is not working for me. So I kind of want to step back though and go to, there was an earlier question about, should I be working in the cloud? And is it right for me to be working in the cloud? And I think we're trying to get at that just a little bit with the cloud playground and to provide that smooth onboarding path. But I think we also have a pretty good faith belief, at least so for me, I think remembering back to my first ESIP, which was, I don't know, maybe 10 years ago. One of the things that struck me back then was that sort of access to for anyone to fast compute near data was like the holy grail back then. It's, in order to get that, you pretty much had to be at a data center or know someone or be particularly funded through particular mechanisms. And with the cloud, we can democratize that sort of access. And yes, you have to, pay the bill for your compute, but you don't have to know someone, right? If you are able to pay that bill for your compute, then you can get that. And that's a big step forward. It's maybe not all the way to where we'd want to be, but it's pretty massive. And I think the reality is that it's not necessarily for everyone. If you need 5 megs of data, then just download it, right? But as we're looking at bigger and larger missions coming up and huge volumes of data, we believe that people are going to need to be doing things where it just becomes infeasible to pull it down on your local computer because your local computer is not fast enough to crunch through it and your network pipe is not big enough to pull the data down in the first place. And so that's what we're working towards and trying to make it easy to dabble. But I guess my open question here, we have an open question of, okay, we're going to make it easy for you to dabble, but we can't just fund your research, right? So what is that smooth transition path to getting users to be able to make those first steps, but then continue on from there if they decide that it's right for them? Can someone solve that for me, please? Like now.
That's why he came. Any feedback on that? I mean, this is something that's been asked many, many times. And in fact, we've had some questions here about what's the incentive to go into it. And one answer was that we're providing resources for you to do that. So, oh, wait.
Steve from USGS. I think earlier on it was mentioned that you all might do some videos or podcasts or that kind of thing, but I know that my own experience to become a cloud user, video tutorials are super, super helpful. And I wonder if that's something you've considered, sort of going from that playground to here's how I would do it if I wasn't a government employee type of thing,
Mm-hmm.
I think a notebook is not the only solution. You might want to think about different users, like, they probably use a Giovanni, they don't use a notebook.
Right.
So you need to think of users as different groups. They have different needs.
Yeah.
We have one.
So could I ask a follow on to that though? I know that notebooks are not everything. But what is the resource that you would provide, for instance, to users that I assume are not yet sure about the cloud or not cloud savvy enough to just know that they need to be there? But notebooks are not what they need in order to run their workflows.
Well, for example, right now Giovanni can only serve data from just disk mostly. Basically you can expand to 12 decks. Yeah, that's a huge cell. And plus also like a word view. Why don't make it like a cell phone available? Yeah, not so everyone has a cell phone, right? You can reach 1 billion people.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so I'm hearing more services.
You probably already do all this. I'm sure you do. But like making it so seamless that you don't even realize that you're in the cloud. The only thing is you do know that you're going to have to pay because you're not going to be downloading it on your machine or on your phone, right? Like that is completely understood, but it like the way it looks and acts is just like it almost, and that's kind of like that's not leading that person to the water, right? Yeah. That's like just, so if there are options and opportunities for them to learn and to act, videos, tutorials, notebooks, all the things, so that if they want to delve deeper, sure, they can do that. But if you don't want to do that, you want to bypass all that, it just like looks and acts like everything else, but you just don't have to download it on your machine.
So along the same lines as video tutorials, I'm thinking something like the carpentries where you have lessons built and instructors can teach from them. And because I know from experience with carpentries, that really gets people in and doing it, where like I won't really go watch a video necessarily, but if somebody's willing to kind of walk me through it, I'm there, and then I'm hooked on it.
Yeah, so I mean, quick shout out to OpenScapes in particular, but we are looking at kind of how we coordinate this with the work that they've been doing, running those kinds of workshops and tutorials and those kinds of things in order to make it a little more self-service. If these resources exist out there, you're not necessarily engaging with an instructor at that moment, but you're still getting access to the same materials, maybe in a more contextual way. So yes, definitely.
Yeah. Patrick, can I just chime in on that
Yeah.
too? So Madison, it's a great idea. Aaron Robinson, for people I don't know in the room. I co-lead NASA OpenScapes with Julie, and really NASA OpenScapes was meant to kind of help this proliferation of cloud workshops that we were seeing across the DACs have some common material. And we were really encouraged to build on what the carpentries have done. And so the mentors like Aaron and others in the room go through carpentries instructor training and learn how to teach. And then we've also been using carpentries as a model for how we develop those cloud tutorials. And so what we're hoping is that the cloud tutorials that the NASA DAC mentors have been developing, which are common across, they're like those first very few steps that are common across the DACs, that those can be reused. And we're seeing that. So there's this efficiency of teaching. So we have notebooks and we have great teachers. And what I think now we're trying to figure out how to scale that beyond people that we're interacting with one-on-one. Aaron, I don't know if you want to add anything else to that.
I think that's pretty good.
Okay. Yeah, maybe one more question, and I have 2 slides. It's great.
I think on the funding barrier side, providing templated language for folks to insert into grants in sort of how to request funding for cloud resources, or providing letters of support in that endeavor for folks, I think can make a difference in helping people find ways to fund the cloud piece of it. Because I think that people are still figuring out exactly how to pitch that as part of their budget planning.
Okay, so other maybe more technical focus that we're working on is metrics and AI. In that regard, I guess putting back on my snarky internet user hat for a minute, if I'm using a site or trying to get to something on the internet and I don't like it, or I can't figure it out or whatnot, I'm not hitting the help me button unless I really need to. I'm just going to find a different way to get to that information. And a concern that I or we have is who are the users that we're not hearing about because they've already dropped off, they're already gone, or they never found us in the first place. And that's really where metrics come into play. But it's tricky. Because, so I worked a while back with some people that were doing a different project than me for a commercial company that was built around, like their business was basically, it was subscriptions to an internet service. Their entire business model was getting people to subscribe. It was like super wholesome stuff. Anyone's yeah, so they were laser focused on what they called the sign up funnel. They could watch every single user's path through the site to get to, did this person successfully basically enter their sign up for a new login, enter their credit card information, whatever it is. If we lost them, where exactly did we lose them? Or we put out this marketing campaign, we tried something. Did it work? Was there a return on investment for that? And those kinds of things. And in hindsight, I was super jealous of them because I was working on this, and we had a much harder problem because not everything translates into just dollars in, dollars out. And not everything translates into, okay, we got one more person, perfect, right? And so one of the things that I think has been a perpetual challenge to us is what are the right metrics for us to declare success on? We really served this person. And I think a lot of times what we come back to is citations, which was mentioned before, or, you know, user surveys, which I guess you have to rely, there's a little selection bias there. Hey, like, you know, how many of us love filling out internet surveys? And the citations themselves can be tricky because there's such a lag time between, and there's such a disconnect between, okay, what tools did I use? What path did I have to go through in order to get what I needed? And then, you know, 6 months later, or however long, I have something that, you know, there's a paper out there. And, you know, we can't necessarily always trace that back to what was easy, what was hard, where did we lose you? And you just got the data from like Google Earth Engine instead or whatnot. So I guess one question that we have is, you know, how can we measure, like, what's a good success metric as people are working their way through the system that will tell us whether we're doing a good job or not. And then I guess another question that's always hanging out there for me is, who are we still missing? And to some extent, metrics can help us with that of, we do something, we try to engage with a particular community and we see an uptick in people using our stuff. But, you know, I'm always a little bit haunted by, you know, walking poster halls and asking people where they got their data. And it's like, my professor handed it to me on a thumb drive is like the #1 source of data. And, you know, I guess there's a question in my mind of how do we reach those people to make sure that what we're doing is easier than a thumb drive. So yeah, could you solve that for me now?
We're really close.
Okay.
Let's
So solve it very quickly.
We need a meet.
One thought I have, and again, maybe you're already doing this, is like looking at or defining what is an active user versus an inactive user, because that's going to change over time. You might be an active user who's downloading complete files, complete data collections, or whatever granules, however you want to define the unit over time. But then that doesn't mean just because you stop that you weren't successful, right? Because you might be just now doing your research and publishing a paper, blah, 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 but you might be returning. So looking, trying to work on the definite, like picking out the metrics, but also defining them, like what is an active user? How are we going to define that? And like looking, I mean, I always looked at things like volumes, looking at the four, what is it? The HTTPS, like the four, whatever the errors or the down. Yeah. I forget what they're called, the download things, like if they're complete or not, whether or not, can you tell if it's just like a robot going through, or can you tell if it's like a user who is just like, has like an automatic script that's just like dumping everything. Yeah. So, I mean, I guess I'm sure you're already doing that, but like really like trying to refine like how you're defining. Oh, and the retention of active users too, right?
Yep.
So like seeing how many times those people return over time, because you want to keep it. It's not just about like getting more and then like letting them go, but like keeping those people too.
Thank you.
No, you're fine. You're fine. I'm just.
Oh, yeah.
No,
I was just going to ask a question. If you're worried about the users you're not capturing, maybe metrics within the pipeline that we've been talking about isn't the right place to put our effort. And maybe it's in like the teaching and capacity building that we already know. And something that struck me is Ruha Benjamin is a technology expert and author, and she talks about the over metrification and over datafication, and like trying to really like dig into data on a smaller scale where the problem is already kind of there, that so just thought I'd mention that.
Yeah, it's tricky.
You got a couple.
Yeah.
Aside here. Keep the mic.
No, do you want to go first? So one of the reasons why I wanted to attend this session today is because I'm also working on a project where we're trying to better understand end users and, better serve them. And in this slide, you mentioned specifically AI, and I'm curious to know, do you have any recommendations of like a tool that's maybe open source, publicly accessible? Are you using something that's built in, internal, or proprietary? Do you have any, what would you recommend to others who are trying to sort of get to the same endpoint of better understanding with an AI tool that, is out there already that can give good information?
Yeah. Yeah.
Oh, good.
We'll get to that in just a second. And I would also recommend, some of what we've done first is AI ops. We're starting to implement that, which is more, as we do it, it's more trying to just understand where errors are coming from, where anomalies are happening in the system and those kinds of things. There is going to be a talk on that, or a session on that on Friday at 11:30, which I forgot to plug. So
good to know.
If you're interested in that more,
Definitely.
that's Friday.
Thank you.
Tammy, we got 10 minutes.
Yeah. So
Okay.
Yeah. So is he online, ready to go?
I think so.
Check. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Can you hear me all right?
Can you hear us?
Oh, yes. Okay, so sorry about that. Okay, so I'll try to keep this brief. My name is Ashish. I'm from a group called NASA Impact. We're based out of the University of Alabama in Huntsville. We do a lot of cutting edge research. The stuff I'm showing today, it's definitely something that we've gotten great feedback on, but also definitely something that's still in progress. We're still working on it. It's not in production yet. But what we're trying to do basically is extract structured metadata from unstructured content. And we're doing this specifically for the user needs database. So basically, we have a bunch of user needs, and we know the sort of metadata we would want to extract from, like what agencies are there, what platforms, what instruments, all that. We want to extract that kind of information, and we want to extract it in an intelligent manner. So if you can imagine, just because somebody mentioned the word Landsat in their user need, doesn't necessarily mean that they wanted something to do with Landsat, right? So we want to capture the context around words that are mentioned. So if you can look at this diagram real quick. So the two sources of information we're dealing with are the SNWG assessments from 2018 and 20, and SNWG needs from 2018 and 20. We pass that through a metadata extractor, which is based on OpenAI GPT 3.5 Turbo. What that gives us is a JSON of structured metadata, which is then placed in the S3 bucket, as you see on the top right of that diagram. And we also maintain a whitelist of these entities that we extract. So having done all of this, we index it into our cognitive search engine. In our case, we use Synequa. And we've got a custom indexing plugin that goes in and fetches this metadata during indexing time so that the metadata is then associated with the document in the index. This is exposed using REST APIs, which means you can use it in your Jupyter notebooks. You can integrate it into your third-party websites. We use it on our front end as well, so the REST APIs. And we also have a Jupyter notebook where we show some of these examples, and I could probably share that at the end of this. And we're constantly working on this going forward. So some of the usage of this in the future, if you can think, even the Earth Data Forum question, where we had a whole lot of questions, we wanted to extract some information from them, get some metrics, we could definitely do that there as well. So this is definitely a generalized framework that we're building. Right now, we're using it for user needs database, but we could in the future imagine it for pretty much anything. And we call it augmented search because that's what we're doing. We're taking traditional search and augmenting it with some of these AI technologies that are up and coming. Anyway, that's all I have for today. Yeah, thank you.
We appreciate that and sorry for the time constraint. Obviously we have your contact info because I think there's some people here in person that are very much interested in that topic and can learn more about it. So definitely appreciate it. So we're right at once again that, you know, we're so excited about all of these topics. We bite off way more than we can chew in terms of that. But obviously, thanks to all of the speakers who came and showed this, we hope that it wasn't too eclectic. It's definitely organized. These are all the things, these are all the tools, these are all the ideas and concepts that we're kind of applying to user needs. And I wish we had another hour to do this as well. But we are going to have the AGU session coming up at AGU on the same topic. And Tammy, if you want to take everybody out, because I know we're right up against lunch. And but maybe just a way that we can codify questions and comments that we couldn't add here live. So
yeah, I'd just like to hit real quickly some of the answers to some of the questions that you guys ask are actually in the slides that our impact team provided. So one of the things they're trying to do is to use ChatGPT to analyze and extract details like platforms and instruments and to identify needs by multiple databases. So I think I hit that slide again. Okay. Also, I wanted to mention that there are notebooks and resources that outline how to query the user needs database using natural language to perform that analysis quickly. So I'm really excited to hear more about this user needs database that's being built right now and to use that as a tool as we continue the conversations.
and we're not going to have it.
And that's it.
That's it.
That is it.
This is time for